to this special interview with one of the Wisconsin Historical Society Press's top-selling authors, Marnie Mamminga. I am Kristen Gilpatrick. I'm the marketing manager at Wisconsin Historical Society Press, and I'm excited to have Marnie with us virtually today to talk about her books and her writing and share a little bit more in depth with all of you. Marnie is the author of the award-winning and best-selling Return to Wake Robin about her family cabin up north, which was also released as an audiobook based on Wisconsin Public Radio's Chapter a Day. And the new release on A Clear Night, which is a series of essays that she wrote, kind of sharing her different experiences in life, in this journey of life, that also involve a lot of the Northwoods too. So without further ado, I want to get talking with Marnie. Marnie, welcome.
Thank you so much, Kristen. It's so fun to be doing this with you.
Well, it's just wonderful to have you here. I think that a lot of readers want to know a little bit more about how you've come to write these two great books that have really become kind of central to our list. A lot of people know, especially Return to Wake Robin. What prompted you to write that? I know you started with books like Chicken Soup from the Soul. You're an English teacher. You have a master's in English, if that's correct. So you've certainly been writing a long time. You didn't just all of a sudden start writing with Return to Wake Robin. But why start with, why the book? Why that book?
Well, I think it all began because I began to see changes around the lake. And the resorts were being sold and turned into condominiums. The little boats were disappearing for big jet skis and bigger boats. The fishing guides were gone from the resorts, the square dances. And I thought, who would remember this? Who would remember this air? And I sat down actually on my dock, and it was just like the ideas were calling to me. And the first essay that I wrote is the lead essay in Return to Wake Robin, about our mother getting us up in the early 50s and 60s to see the sunrise at on Big Spider Lake, and how we hated it. It was cold and, you know, damp and dark, but here was this beautiful sunrise, and that has influenced my life so much, not only personally, but as a writer as well. Looking for those details, looking for that beauty, and trying to share it with others. And so I was compelled to try to get those thoughts down in an essay. And I wrote the Passing the Torch. And that went on to describing that situation of getting up to see the sunrise and passing it on to another generation, which is now been passed on to a fifth generation of cabin sunrise watchers. So it was a risk. You know, I hadn't written in that manner before, in an essay, personal essay sort of form, and I found I loved it. And I am glad that others did too. And that is what propelled me forward to write Return to Wake Robin in that series of essays, documenting the square dances, the fishing guides, the friendships, the rainy days when it was a simpler air. All you needed were the basics on a boat. And a lot of my essays have been in Reader's Digest and Chicago Tribune, Sunday Magazine, and Christian Science Monitor, and so forth. So I enjoyed that form of writing, and really Return to Wake Robin and On a Clear Night are the products of those efforts.
Well, and as a memoirist and writer, you're writing a lot about the people you know, your family, your friends, maybe people who weren't so much your friends, but were part of the story. What do they think about being written about? I mean, there's some nuance there too?
Yes, gratefully, you know, and that's a tricky question when you're writing a memoir, you're writing personal essays about friends and family that you know, because that's where the heart of the story is. And, but at the back of my mind, I always knew I never wanted to say anything that would hurt a family member or a friend. And so you have to dance around that a little bit, but you have to think about how would you feel yourself if somebody wrote something critical about you and it was in print. And I think in those moments of tension in an essay between a family member or friend, that's how we get to know and understand one another. And so I think seeking out that understanding was more important than being critical. And thankfully, my friends and family been very supportive of my work and my writing. And I think they were kind of interested to see what I had to say and have been very supportive. So if anything, I think the essay strengthened our relationships, made it deeper and broader, and again, brought an understanding to each other.
And how did you decide what essays, what stories to tell? Because you have a lifetime of stories and they're all probably good, judging by the way you write. So how do you pick what words?
I find that a story just keeps calling to me. It's almost like it gets stuck in my brain, and that gem of idea. And for example, the Sunrise essay, Passing the Torch. And I thought, what would it be? What happens? I didn't know how, none of these essays do I know how they're going to end. It's always kind of an exploration of the one event that's calling to me. And so I start out with that gem of idea and then kind of see where it follows. And in the process, I learned something. I'm like, why is this important to me? And in the collection of On a Clear Night essays, many of those are the ordinary moments that seem maybe unimportant at the time, but are particularly extraordinary in the sense of what they brought to the relationship, or and especially now in this COVID, we're having so many of those ordinary moments that we miss. And so I think that just rings home the importance of family and friendships and nature, and those little incidences that just ring true.
Well, the one that comes to mind for me like that for you is the essay in On a Clear Night, where you're talking about watching your son in the band.
In the where?
In the band, like marching.
Oh, in the band.
Yeah,
marching.
like
Yes,
like
yes.
maybe you could expound on that a little bit as an example of.
Yes. So that is one of my favorite essays. I think it's the first one in the book, On a Clear Night. And it takes place right now in the fall, homecoming, and how ironic, so many students are not experienced that homecoming parade. But in our town, it was about 15,000 at the time. The homecoming parade was a huge deal. And when my boys were little boys, like, 1, 3, and 5, that was an activity. So we went down to see the homecoming parade, and we always loved the band. And my husband is a musician, as are other family members. So to us, that was a natural to seek out the music, I guess. And it was a beautiful fall day. It was gorgeous. And it was so exciting to see the band come. Well, then fast forward, what would that be, about 12 years later, 10, 12 years later, when my sons are now in middle school and high school, and they're marching in this parade, same parade, homecoming afternoon, same path down the hill towards the river. And I was just struck by, again, the passing of time, how so many things change, but some stay the same. And the fleeting aspect of life, how fast it goes, and the beauty of those moments, and to be able to repeat them as, from small children now to a drum major, a trumpeter, and a trombonist marching in the parade, and knowing they were also kind of figuratively marching out of my life into, those out of high school into those college years. So I thought that was something I wanted to explore in that essay, and to capture those moments that just kind of stay with you, that this life is these moments, even what we're in now, will pass. So to grab that beauty, grab that music.
That's great. And what would you say was maybe one of the hardest ones to write? And I think your answer is going to depend on how you define hardest. Because there's hard as in difficult grammatically, structurally writing, but there's also hard emotionally. I don't know if you have two answers or if it's the same answer. But.
I do have two answers, actually. I would have to say they're all kind of hard to write because they're so personal, and you are talking about family and friends and yourself as well. And so they're all hard to write, and I spend a lot of time rewriting and working through them. But probably the first one that comes to mind is A Christmas Rose, which is in On a Clear Night. And it's about my father's struggle with alcoholism. And in our era, growing up, 50s, 60s, etc., there was really no help for alcoholics. There was not, there wasn't a support group. And it was kind of, if you had an alcoholic in your family, you kept it private, you kept it quiet as best you could. So my father lost his job, 5 kids, struggled with alcoholism for about 7 years when we were, my age was grade school, junior high through high school. And thankfully he recovered through the help of AA, which was huge help. And there was a Christmas Eve where there are 5 of us and our siblings. And unfortunately, he came home drunk on Christmas Eve. And yet I sensed that he didn't want to be that way. He didn't want to be in the situation, the financial reversal, etc. And I saw that in his eyes, and he was asking hoping for forgiveness. And I think I've recognized as a child, but I couldn't verbalize it until many years later as an adult. And so that one was a hard to write, and it came out in the Chicago Tribune originally. And I didn't tell my family about it because it was so sensitive. And then it was accepted, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I better give them a warning. But I wanted to look at it, alcoholism from my father's point of view rather than from our point of view. And it's one of my favorite essays because I think it brought me understanding of his situation and how hard he worked to persevere and overcome that difficulty. And then the second one that was very difficult was about my mother, Woody, who was on the front cover of On a Return to Wake Robin.
One of the best pictures ever, by the way.
Yes, and my father took that photo in 1945 or 46, I think, after he came home from World War II in the European theater. And he was a wonderful photographer, and he captured that moment. And so when the press chose it for I've got it right here beside me, chose it for the cover, I was just thrilled. But my mother was a very strong life force, creative, energetic, etc. And sadly, at the end of her life, I was her healthcare power of attorney and healthcare manager, and I had to make the decision to put her in a nursing home. And here was a woman who was still just sharp as a tack, loved her lipstick, her hair combed, could play a mean game of bridge, could quote, Shakespeare, but physically greatly declined. So that was one of the hardest essays I wrote, and it's called Searching for a Silver Lining. And I think the silver lining that we found was that despite the difficulties that my siblings and I had in trying to care for her, and how difficult it was, my mother was so accepting, which helped us. And then also that our love for each other is what gave us the strength to make that decision and see her through those difficult days. And she saw us through them too. That was hard.
And in terms of the writing process itself, when you're writing those hard pieces, what part of the writing of it do you enjoy? Is it a catharsis, sort of a catharsis?
meaning, I think, to my writing, and I hope that that transcends to the readers as well in the similar experiences that they've had.
Well, and when you're writing about something so emotional or so involved, I would think one of the hardest parts, and you can answer this, would be it's going to come out really long. Like when you first write it all down, it's just going to be this big flow of material. How do you go about taking all of that and making it into a concise, well-worded, emotional essay?
Well, that's the most difficult part, is to cut yourself, edit yourself. And the first thing is to get it down. I'm a writer who kind of, a sentence at a time. If I didn't like that, I go back, fix it before I move on to the next. So I usually take some notes first and then kind of go with those, then come back, try to formulate it into a whole, and then go back and kind of basically, if you will, clean it up. What is, usually there's too much. What is not needed? What is the essence? How do you get there? And usually you have to be critical of your own writing. You have to be very critical of it and say, no, this isn't working, or did I repeat that? Or does this need more clarity? Should I expand on that? So you have to act as your own best editor, I think, in terms of drawing it out. Right now I am writing perspectives, short little essays for NPR in Illinois here, and station out of Northern Illinois University. And those are 275, 80 words. So you have to make your point, and they're recorded on air, 90 seconds. You have to make your point in a very concise manner. And talking about whittling things down to the essence, that has been a wonderful exercise for me to do. And I think as I continue to write more essays, I will bring that kind of those lessons, that those tools with me. But I think if you ever look at blogs, particularly cooking blogs, you want the recipe, and there's so much text, and you just want to get down to the essence of how do you make this wonderful dish? It's kind of the same way with writing an essay, I think.
Well, and I once had a journalism teacher who was fond of saying, Mr. Henry Lipple, thank you, who was saying that the shortest thing you write is often the hardest thing you'll write. And he was referring to a headline, trying to capture a whole story in a headline. But I would say that is what you're saying right now, that sometimes trying to write the same story shorter is even harder.
Well, and one of the, often writers ask you, how do you sum up your essay or your book or your in like a single paragraph, and that is very tricky to pull that in together into I had an English teacher, I didn't have her actually, but she was known in high school for saying vigorous writing is concise. And I don't know if that's her own philosophy or if she's quoting somebody, but it just kind of passed through the school. You just knew vigorous writing was concise. And so I think that is something that we all writers need to adhere to. And I think it's like polishing a rough stone. It comes out in a much more beautiful form. Actually, the more concise it can be.
Well, and speaking of school, as people of all ages are going to watch this Q&A with you, is there anything that you could have done looking back when you were a teen or young adult, could have done differently that would have prepared you to be an even better writer?
Well, I love to read, and I think that was really what set me on my writing path. I love to, read as a child, and we got those little magazines you could send away for books, like a little book club. That was so much fun to gather up your quarters and put them in an envelope. And I think that reading and being exposed to many different types of styles was very influential. I wish back in my day, the idea of becoming a writer was really not discussed. Basically, women particular were teachers, nurses, secretaries. That was kind of our career path. And I wish that I had gone to journalism school. I did not do that because I didn't know it was available. So I ended up being a journalist and being a freelance writer for the Chicago Tribune and some other news organizations. So I think I learned a lot of training on the job. And I think following that self-instinct of what is calling to you, what is your passion? And I think that helped, that whole, maybe being off course helped my writing all the more. It may, instead of being on a direct path, that zigzag is okay. It's good. You learn a lot that way. So
You get a lot more material to write about when you're zigzagging, that's for sure.
yeah, you do, because you've learned a lot along the way, or you hope you have anyway.
Well, and speaking of writing about things, the Wisconsin Historical Society has had this COVID journal. We've been promoting people to journal about their COVID experiences that everybody is having these days. And I don't know if you have any tips or advice for how people might go about writing down, whether they're kids or adults, kind of their own essays on what they're going through, just for themselves, for the future, whatever. How would you go about doing that if you were to write an essay?
I am actually keeping a COVID journal myself. And I started right at the shutdown in March. And I've stuck with it. And I have to say, it's not been easy to stick with it because I think we all have, COVID fatigue right now. And you wonder if if you're writing, is this going to matter? It's going to be important. But you look back in history and particularly I read, at the start of this, I read Anne Frank's diary. And again, for who knows how many times, but reading it from our perspective in the pandemic gave me new insight that she didn't know that her journal was going to be her diary was going to be so important historically. And she wrote from the heart and she wrote very honestly. And I think those would be two things for all the writers out there, no matter what your age is, to write truthfully and honestly from your heart. And that no matter how maybe insignificant what you're writing about, it could actually be very significant. And I think if any of the writers out there are doing that, I would say continue. It's easy to kind of give up right now. We're all, kind of tired about it. But I think, especially now that we know this is going to continue for a while, you as a writer can bring more of a essence into what is happening in your personal life and how it's being impacted, your friends, your family, your school by the COVID. And I think those details will be wonderful. And even if you just write a line or two, and it doesn't need to be every day. I think look back at the week and think, gosh, what stuck out this week that I feel is important to write about, and then write that down. And it doesn't need to be perfect and just be in a draft form, but to get the essence of it down and keep going. Yeah, keep recording it, because I think these will be very historic documents in years to come.
Thank you. And besides your COVID journaling, and it sounds like some essays for Illinois NPR there, are there any other things that you're working on writing right now?
There are two, and they're both way off my, out of my, box, but I'm loving them. They're both fiction. One is a children's story illustrated by a wonderful artist at, we have just finished. It's called the Woodpecker Song, and we're sending it out for publication, hoping to find a publisher. And it celebrates nature and how nature can speak to us, which I think is very important at this time, particularly in this pandemic. And it's based actually on one of my NPR essays. And I thought it would make an interesting children's story. And the illustrations are lovely, collage type of work. So that's very different from what I've been doing before. And we're working on a sequel about wolves, kind of the same, a children's story for wolves and being afraid. How can we look at fear and distance ourselves from it, which I think will be particularly important now. And the wolf is often a symbol of fear, so, but he's not to be feared. So we're kind of playing with that right now. And then I have finally finished my children's novel, which ironically is about a young girl in the North Woods at a cabin in a summer at the lake, and it involves wolves as well. So I finally have finished that, and I'm got to the end. Now I'm going back and doing revisions, and I'll start preparing it for finding that publisher, and just keep on going down those roads, looking for the the right path.
Can you ever imagine not writing?
No, I really can't. And it brings me much joy. And sometimes you think, gosh, should I keep going? Do I have anything else to say? Would anybody be interested? I think those are all self-doubts that many writers experience. But I think if I didn't write, I don't know what I would do. I'm not a TV watcher. I'm not, housekeeping isn't my thing. I love the adventure of writing. Where is it going to take me? It's almost, and even being kind of sequestered as we are now, writing can take us down another road, and where we can explore different themes and ideas and just see what happens. And that's part of the fun of it, a curiosity. So I hope to keep going. Yeah, keep writing.
Well, keep on exploring, Marnie. We love reading what you have to write.
Thank you.
Again, your Wisconsin Historical Society press books are Return to Wake Robin and On a Clear Night. They're all available at your favorite book retailer, at libraries everywhere, and of course at our own online store, wisconsinhistory.org. Click the shop button and you'll find them. Thank you again so much for joining us on this.
Delightful, my honor. I just love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and take care and keep writing.
Thank you so much, and stay healthy and happy in this COVID time. Best wishes. Thank you.